Tuesday,
Right.
Monday, and you Tuesday.
Yep. So, Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim and Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh, everyone. Today is day 49 with Tafseer Surah Al-Araf. And if we were to just remember some of the things that we talked about last time, وَإِلَى عَادٍ أَخَاهُمْ هُودًا قال يا قوم اعبدوا الله ما لكم من إله غيره أفلا تتقون. Into the people of Ad, their brother Hud, which we talked about. قال يا قوم اعبدوا الله ما لكم من إله غيره. Let's just remember a couple things that we talked about last time. We talked about Ad and hold on. We talked about Ad and we did a surface translation. This is what we called it. We did a surface translation and we talked about أَفَلَا تَتَّقُونَ, that it was related to that they had already known the past history of Prophet Nuh's people and how, due to their rejection of Prophet Nuh, that they eventually were cursed. We also looked at some of the patterns that are at least going to be common in the stories of all the different prophets that were mentioned in Surah Al-Araf, is that there's always il-mala. So whether that's the elite or whether those are the chieftains or whether those were the influencers, this is what they're called during our time. So all of those people that had a certain influence, a certain power, a certain authority over the people, and certainly had this type of influence on the masses there. And then the masses said, "Inna lanaraka fi safaha." They were basically saying that they were seeing that Prophet Hud alayhi salam was somehow in a state of safaha. Now, this is a slightly different accusation than the accusation that the people of Qawm Nuh had said to Prophet Nuh. To Prophet Nuh, they basically had said that they inna lanaka fi dalalin mubin. They had basically accused Prophet Nuh alayhi salam of being in a state of dalal, in a state of delusion. Although the word dalal is slightly different, but it does give us the inference that they had a certain, at least Qawm Nuh, they had a certain heritage that they basically had considered as the center of truth. And based on that, they basically judged Prophet Nuh alayhi salam that that was an enough evidence, since he is away or different from the path of their ancestors, and therefore that's enough evidence to prove that he was misguided or that he was on the wrong path. Versus the people of Qawm Hud, I want you to look at the word safaha, which also gives us another type of inference that the people of Qawm Hud, they pretty much had some sort of let's call it infatuation about their technology, their intelligence, their civilization. So we could see that the accusation of lacking mind, the accusation of lacking stability in what actually controls his decision making. So they were very infatuated with what ideas and what patterns they would hold and what patterns that they would base their decision making on. But of course, certainly that is not to praise them or endorse them, but that is actually to say that their infatuation was actually going wrong. They thought that their intelligence, that their civilization, that it was somehow at a high level, and they were so fascinated with it that they actually thought that a way to accuse, or a way to bring about the lack of confidence basically within the society is by accusing the mind competence of Prophet Hud as lacking that competence, and therefore not being qualified. And of course, through that, they said, "Inna لَنَظُنُّكَ مِنَ الْكَاذِبِينَ." I want you to look at the word لَنَظُنُّك. In other words, that they necessarily necessarily have that did they necessarily have this type of confidence that that what he was saying was not true or true? No, they did not. So you could see that they were somewhat in doubt, somewhat not sure, somewhat feeling that there is probably some truth within the words of Prophet Hud alayhi salam. And certainly they said, "Inna nadhunnuka min al-kadhibin." Why did they say "Inna nadhunnuka min al-kadhibin"? We basically connected it with the previous ayat when Prophet Nuh alayhi salam had basically left that city. The generations that later had come, they basically did leave some traces going back all the way to Prophet Nuh. So certainly the people of Qawm Hud still had some information or some records of what happened to Prophet Nuh alayhi salam. Okay, then we went to that same pattern, that other pattern, which is not getting too not getting dragged into the debate that the people of Qawm Nuh were trying to drag people into. What kind of a debate were they trying to drag Prophet Nuh or even Prophet Hud into? They were trying to drag them into an ad hominem type of a debate where he's focused on defending himself and trying to defend himself, and that becomes a place where the whole argument is swayed from what the whole argument and what the whole mission and message was all about to a new place of an argument where he's about to defend himself. And here's one thing: when you get dragged into speaking and defending yourself, and that's one game and one tactic that people of dalal and people of dalal might get into, is that they'll create a lie, even though they know it's a lie, but they'll create that lie, and then they'll basically play this game by getting you dragged into trying to refute the lie. And then they'll create more and more lies, and the more lies created, you'll end up just getting, let's call it dragged. Let's call it, you would be getting uh, into this type of war where it's another type of war, by the way, that shaitan might use, or diabolical people might use. They'll put in so many different lies, and then without you realizing, you're just playing like a ping pong, trying to jump over this corner, that corner, trying to respond to each and every single accusation. And that's basically going to make you lose that energy, because you're just trying to refute each and every single lie, each and every single accusation, and then you forget about the mission. You forget about your own life. You forget about your own responsibility, because you're just trying to defend yourself. And then that's what many of the narcissists might do. And that's what many, even, let's call it the narcissism within the society. That's exactly what the prophets were dealing with. They were dealing with these types of narcissists that were playing this game, putting all out so many accusations against the prophets. But the prophets, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala was guiding them to not respond to every single accusation, because without you getting that message out there, you're just going to get busy and you're going to get yourself drained. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala was letting them know, don't get yourself drained responding to each and every single accusation that they might throw at you, because they know it's a tactic to get you drained, and not necessarily something that is containing of any type of a resource or any type of referencing or any type of evidence, but it's a tactic to be used in order to drain you from continuing to deliver the message. This is very important to keep in mind. And that's why Even Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala was telling us, Inna Allah yudafi'u 'anil ladhina amanu. That Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is the one that supports, that protects, that defends the mu'mineen. Don't get yourself drained trying to defend yourself and trying to refute each and every single accusation that is put out there, because that's a tactic that that shaitan and even those that are enforced by shaitan will use against you. They will try to drain you and drag you to defending yourself. Okay. قال يا قوم ليس بي سفاهة ولكني رسول من رب العالمين. That's that mission. That's that confidence. That's that determination to deliver the message that he was a prophet of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And with that determination comes with that consistency in completing the mission. And certainly we continued all the way up until, let's see, up until right here. فأنجيناه والذين معه برحمة منا وقطعنا دابر الذين كذبوا بآياتنا وما كانوا مؤمنين. That's where we left off at. Of course, certainly Prophet Hud عليه السلام was warning them of a punishment, or was warning them of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala that he will retaliate against certainly their accusations and against their rejection of the message. But we still didn't do the part about this portion, at least from this ayah, from right here until right here with in Tafseer Al-Qurtubi. Let's go ahead and really quick do it. وَإِلَى عَادٍ أَخَاهُمْ هُودًا, meaning that we had sent to Ad, the people of Ad, and we said the people of Ad were living in an area called Al-Ahqaf, and we said that that's pretty much the corner of northern Yemen and the west of Oman, and also the southern part of the Arabian Peninsula, that's where Al-Ahqaf were, and that's where the people of Ad were living in. And certainly we can see that perhaps maybe the circumstances were different from today. It was definitely of something that we could see based on the ayat that they had built castles, or at least huge monuments that they had built, basically different reservoirs for water, resources, and all of that was available. And we also talked about the word Hud, and we said most of the prophets' names are actually not Arabic names, but certainly we have the name Salih was Arabic, and so was Muhammad, but all the other names were not Arabic names. This is where we left off at in Tafsir Surah Al-Araf and Al-Qurtubi, Inna lanaraka fi safaha. And we talked about the word safaha, and we went in details with the word safaha, and I believe what we did was go to this page. We went over this page and we talked about the safih and the safa and what that means. And in short, we said is-safa or safih is basically having lack of stability in mind, in decision making, and mannerisms. So it's basically in three things: in decision making, in the process of their thinking and how they process their ideas, and also in mannerisms. So if a person was having this lack of stability in any of these three, that would be a person that is safi. I want to look at these three things. So we're talking about decision making. We're talking about the process of thinking. So not necessarily decision making, but sometimes the way that you may read the data and you may interpret the data and later perhaps make a decision, and later how that affects your behavior. So all of that would basically mean a form of safa. The form of safa basically lacking stability in thought, lacking stability in decision making, and lacking stability in behavior, that would be a person that is safih. And certainly a person that is safih, we looked at different types of safaha. We said that there's one, whether we're speaking about in Sharia, a lack of consideration to perhaps maybe their dunya interest, just a different interest that basically serve them in this life. And that's وَلَا تُؤْتُوا السُّفَهَاءَ أَمْوَالَكُمْ. So look at whether it's looking at money or whether it's looking at different decisions that they're making, and that it's supposed to be going in accordance with their own interests. But if this person is perhaps maybe dropping out of school and probably using the wrong items, or probably not lacking money management, then that's a person that lacks that stability to determine their potentials, their resources, and using it in the way that is serving their interest. So if it is not serving their interest, that actually means this person is a safi. Same thing if we're talking about matters in akhirah. So if that person has the potential, money potential, life potential, perhaps time is a potential as well, and perhaps maybe energy or intelligence or whatever it is, they have these potentials, but are they using it for a trajectory that will enable them, or at least give them the opportunity to go to Jannah or not? If not, that this person is a safi. So therefore, we're looking at two things here. We're looking at using potentials to serve a person's interest in dunya, and potentials to serve a person's interest in akhirah. And a person that does not use these potentials for their interest, dunya or akhirah interest, is basically a safi. That is basically a safi. So a safi could also go back to a certain meaning, which is a person that is ignorant, a person that lacks mind, a person that basically is also lacking the competence to read the information and understand it, and therefore they might be impulsive in their behavior, in their decision making, and certainly they end up being hostages to their own lust, to their own impulsive minds, and to their own, let's call it a chemical imbalance, hormonal imbalance, different imbalances in the brain. All of those different things are basically another meaning for isafi. So we're going to, of course, right now, I guess, skip this piece of it because we did go in details with it. So in the context of this one, what does it mean when they said, "Inna lanaraka fi safaha"? We see you as incompetent mentally. Is this what they meant to say? That he was incompetent mentally, or that somehow he basically had not lived the type of race that they were living in. So in other words, within our society, you would see that what they would consider, or within our society, what is considered as intelligence or a person of influence is probably based on the number of influencers, number of followers, or probably to judge an influencer, you're going to judge based on maybe the number of subscribers or the number of followers or the net worth, the money. All of that is going to determine that this is your net worth. This is how influential you are, and therefore determine your importance. Okay, so certainly they considered perhaps using different types of, let's call it the different types of tools that they determined that Prophet Hud alayhi salam was not of that importance. So they considered that, hey, you are in a place of safaha, and certainly they considered that in order to embrace and be a person of aql or a wisdom or mind, that the person is supposed to be at a certain scale of influence, just what they're probably here trying to project, which is their connection to dunya, their connection to their own ancestry, and certainly their connection to building monuments and all of that. And they consider that if you are not seeing the world in the same way, then you have a problem in your vision. So when you look at the word safaha, are they accusing the mental capacity of Prophet Hud alayhi salam, or are they accusing his insight, or are they accusing his akhlaq? What are they really accusing? They're more accusing his ability to give decent, let's say, instruction, and they're accusing also his ability to lead them to the perfect trajectory. So that's why they said, "Inna lanadhunnuka min al-kadhibin." So they were doubting his integrity, they were doubting his mental capacity, they were doubting his decision making. So that's why they said, "Inna lanaraka fi safaha," because to them, in order to be a person of integrity, you basically had to embrace their custom, their culture. In order to be a person of intelligence, that you had to embrace at least their ideas and their way of life, and what they considered as being intelligent. Just like today in our time, if you memorize the Quran, for example, or probably learn Islamic studies, definitely that's not going to be paying you much. And the society is basically going to see a person within this level of ilm as not having the importance as perhaps maybe a doctor or maybe an engineer. And the society that had considered that in order to be important, that it basically depends on the amount of money that you're bringing in. It depends on the amount of income you're making. Other than that, then in that society, and just like in our society, your income is not of high in its numbers. Therefore, you're not of this type of, or in any importance, or perhaps maybe in your degree of importance, or in your degree of why you should be considered as to be taken seriously, or why you should be considered as a person of influence. Want you to look at these. This is very important, because within our society, you can see that you can have a celebrity, a star, perhaps maybe some kind of a person that is just running after a ball, making huge amounts of money, huge amounts of money. We're talking about millions every single month. Or perhaps maybe an actor, or maybe a singer, even making more than maybe a neurosurgeon, or maybe a scholar in Deen, or maybe a scholar in science. And what are they doing? Well, they're basically running after a ball, or probably singing and making music in a society where a person that had worked so hard, whether in memorizing Quran, or probably a neurosurgeon, or probably a cardiologist, is paid pennies compared to what maybe a soccer player is being paid. Then in that situation, you're going to see that the society is built on giving the wrong, let's call it appreciation. It's built on the wrong appreciation, wrong standards, and certainly it will reflect on the society and how they consider standards. So if the standard is, if you could be a singer, or probably some kind of let's call it an illicit person to display body, to display maybe certain things, and this person becomes a key figure within the society, a key figure to get paid in millions, if not even more, and even have the most following. And this person, just you look at Speed, for example, probably the most stupid person on earth. Yet this person is being paid millions for the stupidity that he's presenting. Yet you see that the stupidity that he's presenting is actually worth more than all that is given to a scholar on Islam, or a scholar probably on neurosurgery or neuroscience or whatever it is, or probably a different field in what serves humanity. And that's why we're living in an age of absurdity. That's part of the age of postmodernism, when stupidity, being trivial, is being appreciated by the society a lot more than those that are giving insight, or giving life, or giving perhaps the most important meaning in life, whether it's understanding deen, or whether it's giving people health. But you see in the society that we're living in, that being stupid is paid a lot more, and you'll be paid a lot more by being stupid and trivial, perhaps maybe jumping up on some cliff to cliff to cliff and putting your life at risk, but you're considered as more influential. What an age of stupidity we're living in. As part of postmodernism. Postmodernism, where stupidity is really let's call it the key definition, and the definition of postmodernism in a nutshell. Okay, let's see. And ru'ya, when they said ru'ya, are they actually talking about inna lanaraka? When they said inna lanaraka, are they actually talking about an actual vision in sight? Or is this talking about lanaraka to mean what they understand? In other words, we're not talking about vision, meaning that they are seeing him with a certain vision in their eyes, that they're seeing that he's a Safi. But no, this is to actually mean that lanaraka, meaning from their decision making, that this is how their brain is processing the data, or their brain is processing the information that Prophet Hud alayhi salam is giving them, that they're seeing it as trivial, that they're seeing it as lacking importance. They see it as lacking competence, at least in his ability to give them that information about Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Okay, let's continue right there. وَذْكُرُوا إِذْ جَعَلَكُمْ خُلَفَاءَ مِنْ بَعْدِ قَوْمِ نُوحٍ قال يا قوم ليس بي سفاهة ولكني رسول من رب العالمين. And we're going to jump right there. أوعجبتم أن جاءكم ذكر من ربكم. And of course we said this is an interrogative clause, but it's actually an informative clause. أوعجبتم, are you surprised that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala had sent a man from you to basically warn you, and basically give you that information about Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, about Judgment Day, about that there's a purpose behind life, and that life is going to lead to another transition called Yawm al-Qiyamah, and what's going to happen there. And then he says, وَاذْكُرُوا إِذْ جَعَلَكُمْ خُلَفَاءَ مِنْ بَعْدِ قَوْمِ نُوحٍ. And remember when Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala had made you as khulafa. Al-khulafa, who's al-khulafa? So let's see what he says right there. He says, khulafa, jam'u khalifa. It is the plural of khalifa. What is a khalifa anyways? Al-khulafa is basically a nation or a group of people or a person that comes after another person. So when you look at the Khalifa, Abu Bakr as-Siddiq, for example, he came as the leader after the Prophet ﷺ. So he became the Khalifa, meaning the person that came in authority after the Prophet ﷺ. And certainly then they called Umar ibn Khattab Khalifat Rasulillah, the Khalifa after the Khalifa, or after the person that was leading after the Prophet, or the Prophet of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And then they said, well, this is going to be taking too long. The Khalifat of Khalifat Rasulillah, and then later on the Khalifa, just call him al-Khalifa and that's it, or Amir al-Mu'mineen, and that's basically it. Okay, let's see. زادكم في الخلق بسطة, that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala increased your stature. What does that even mean? What does that even mean? زادكم في الخلق بسطة. What is البسطة? البسطة, it actually means that they were tall in their stature and in the building of their body. Let's see Ibn Abbas and what he said. Ibn Abbas said they were مئة ذراع. مئة ذراع, a ذراع is basically an arm reach. So if we're talking about مئة ذراع, we're talking about almost 120 feet. And the shortest one was ستين ذراعا. So we're looking at almost 90 feet, 90 feet tall. Let's say. And he said, and this increase was more than their ancestors. And some actually said that they were in the same stature, same height of the people of Qawm Nuh. And let's say, and Wahb ibn Munabbih actually said their head, the skull, was like a huge dome. And even the eye socket, the eyeball socket, when they would die, in other words, we're talking about their skeleton, that the different wild animals, wild bird animals, they would build their nests in it. And that's the same thing with their noses. But I want you to look at this. I mean, all of this information is quite what? Is it exaggerated or is that real? 120 feet tall and 90 feet. That guy's considered short. The 90-foot guy, he's considered a midget according to this. Okay, let's see. And he said, Tafseer Al-Baghawi. I would like to add that you'll find this information not only in Tafseer Al-Baghawi, but you'll find it in Tafsir ibn Kathir, you'll find it in Tafsir al-Razi, you'll find it in so many different tafsir. But just because it is there in certain books of tafsir, you'll see that هذه الأخبار من الإسرائيليات, that they're more of the legends that were mentioned in the society of Bani Israel. So will you necessarily find such legends, let's call it where it is considered as legitimate or canonized information or recorded information in the books of Bani Israel? The answer is no. You don't necessarily have to find that. It can be just information that was passed down, and such information is not necessarily having the resources that prove it in any shape or form, or the resources to, let's say, document it, but it can be just information that was passed down, or probably that was made up within that society, and not necessarily as something that is based on reference. So I want you to just keep that one in mind. Just because you see Israeliyat doesn't necessarily mean that this was documented in the books and in the resources of Bani Israel, meaning in their books. Okay. So just keep that one in mind. Now, do we have any information of how tall they were, even though you see Ibn Abbas had said, or at least it was mentioned that Ibn Abbas said this information, or Wahb ibn Munabbih that he said this information, but that does not necessarily mean it is authentic information going back to the Prophet ﷺ. It could be attributed to Ibn Abbas, but we may not necessarily have any record or chain of narration to prove such information. But what we know is that certainly the ayah did mention وَزَادَكُمْ فِي الْخَلْقِ بَسْطَةً, but it didn't give us any numbering, or it didn't give us any, let's say, documented information on what size that these people were really in. It just said زادكم في الخلق بسطة. It could be that they were 7 feet, 8 feet, 9 feet, but not necessarily 190. I don't have evidence to refute that they were 190, and I also don't have any evidence to prove that they were 7 feet either. But the ayah just said زادكم في الخلق بسطة, and therefore to let us know when he said فاذكروا آلاء الله لعلكم تفلحون. In other words, why would he even tell them زادكم في الخلق بسطة? Why did he even need to say that? Why was that even important? After that, telling them فاذكروا آلاء Allah, and remember the bounties of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala upon you. Why would he even say that? Because part of the bounties that he was reminding them of was actually their stature, their body sizes, which definitely played perhaps a very important role in giving them the different privileges, whether in facing a lot of the different dangers in nature, or probably being capable of making use of different things in nature. That was probably something that maybe made Prophet Nuh alayhi salam remind them that, hey, the stature of your body buildup is something that is quite different, and definitely you didn't have any power in how you got that, but certainly it was easy for them to spot a difference, probably by seeing maybe other statures of other people, and probably other generations, or probably other societies, and how they didn't necessarily have this privilege. And the other question is, can we necessarily consider big in body size a privilege at all based on this ayah? Well, based on this ayah, yes, it is a privilege. Based on this ayah, I'm not talking about big body size to mean fat. We're speaking about big body size in height, big body size in health, big body size in perhaps maybe body buildup, all of that is a privilege. So when you say, what is the evidence? When it said وَزَادَكُمْ فِي الْخَلْقِ بَسْطَةً فَاذْكُرُوا آلَاءَ, it was considered as one of those privileges. What is al-ala anyways? Remember the ayah فَاذْكُرُوا آلَاءَ اللَّهِ عَلَيْكُمْ in Surah Al-Rahman. Oh, what is the ayah? What is in Surah Al-Rahman? What is it? What is the repeated sentence in Surah Al-Rahman? فبأي آلاء ربكما تكذبان, right? And that's the same thing. فبأي آلاء ربكما تكذبان. So here, فاذكروا آلاء الله عليكم لعلكم تفلحون. I want to look at this one, that connection between لعلكم تفلحون and فاذكروا آلاء الله لعلكم تفلحون. And you can actually take that right there. فاذكروا آلاء الله لعلكم تفلحون. You can, just the sentence alone is something to be highlighted. Let's highlight it for a bit. فاذكروا آلاء الله لعلكم تفلحون. Even if you were to just highlight this sentence right there. Remember the bounties of your Lord Almighty in order for you to be successful. Just highlight just a sentence. So what does that mean? In order for you to be a successful person, you have to first recognize the bounties that surround you, or else you will not be capable of using them. And this is key. In other words, one way of being successful is by remembering and seeing the bounties or the good things that surround you. That's one way of being a successful person. What is tuflihun? Tuflihun actually means to be successful. So one method, and this is a very important thing, the psychology of how to be a successful person. One way is فَاذْكُرُوا آلَاءَ اللَّهِ. Just remember Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's bounties upon you. Look through the lens of optimism. Look through the lens of positivity. Look through the lens of being thankful. In other words, another inference that we get out of this is that you don't want to attribute that these privileges or these bounties, that they belong to you because somehow you're entitled to them. But what you need to remember is that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala was the one to give you these privileges, and that you need to use them for the sake of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in order to get to the real success. The second thing is that فَاذْكُرُوا آلَاءَ اللَّهِ عَلَيْكُمْ. Remember that they actually are privileges that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala had given you, and that you didn't necessarily make such privileges. They're privileges that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala had gifted you with them, and not that you were someone that was entitled to these privileges, but they're actually things that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala had given you. And this is very important right there. فَاذْكُرُوا آلَاءَ اللَّهِ لَعَلَّكُمْ تُفْلِحُونَ. So remember all the different boundaries of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in order for you to be a successful person. Let's see right here. This one's quite interesting. Let's see. روى شهر ibn حوشب. It's quite a different name. عن أبي هريرة إن كان الرجل من قوم عدل ليتخذ المصراعين أو المصراعين من حجارة لو اجتمع عليها 500 من هذه الأمة لم يطيقوه وإن كان أحدهم لا يغمز بقدمه الأرض فتدخل فيها. Watch, look at this one. So this is a hadith right there. Let's say first, now we're going to go to 9. And he said it was narrated by al-Badri, and the Suyuti mentioned it in al-Durr al-Manthur. And let's say, and he said that Shahr ibn Hawshab was a person كثير الإرسال والأوهام. What does that mean? That he basically had a lot of narrations that did not have a complete chain of narration. In other words, we're speaking about a form of a non-authentic hadith. The chain of narration had missing links that traced all the way back to the Sahabi or even the Prophet ﷺ. And then the other problem is that he had a lot of awham. What is al-wahm? Al-wahm is a type of an imagination. So in other words, he would go into these fantasies and actually make up some stories that didn't actually, that was not even mentioned. You know, it happens that someone might say, hey, you said this, and the other person might say, I don't know what you're talking about. No, you misunderstood. And then if this person has a series and a pattern of making up stories that didn't actually exist or making up their own interpretations, then this is a person of wahm. This actually reflects their inability to pass on accurate information, and perhaps maybe information that we can consider as based on evidence. Then in that situation, we're going to be accusing that person's competence, and we're going to be considering that the information that they might pass down onto us is probably not as credible information, and therefore we cannot consider it as something that we can depend on. So let's see, what was some of the information that he was saying? That they were using all these rocks, that if it was during the time of the Prophet ﷺ, it would actually require 500 people to carry these rocks or these stones in order to build something. So we're talking about 500 people to just carry one stone. So a guy would be capable of pushing one rock. If it was during the time of the Prophet ﷺ, it would have needed 500 people. That's, you know, we're talking about the description of giants right there, but certainly we said that that narrator had a history of making up or at least fantasies right there. And let's see. And he said in the person from the people of Qawm Hud, even if they were to step on the ground, that their footprints would be so big, all right, that it would make a huge hole in on the face of the earth. So you're talking about, and of course, these stories do exist in tafsir, just like you would see right there. Al-Qurtubi mentioned it, but the good news is that he only mentioned it in just a couple lines. If you were to go to Tafsir Ibn Kathir, perhaps, or probably Al-Baghawi, or probably Al-Razi, and the list goes on and on, and some other tafsir, they might actually go in so many details that really did not contain any evidence. So just because you find it in Kutub Tafsir, in some books of Tafsir, that doesn't mean that you're going to use that and say, "Oh, well, I found it in a book of Tafsir." Yeah, good for you, but that's not necessarily enough evidence to prove that such information is actually based on credible resources. So just because it's in a book tafsir, that's not necessarily an evidence. We need that tafsir to give us the evidence that this information is actually true. And we see that the scholars that reviewed this, they said, well, sorry, but this information is either from al-Isra'iliyat, or we would see some information that was based on certain resources that didn't actually have that didn't necessarily have an authentic chain of narration. Okay, let's see. فَاذْكُرُوا آلَاءَ اللَّهِ. The word ala is basically all the different bounties that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala had given you. Let's see, and he said that the singular basically conjugation for that, the word ala, and the singular of it is ila or il wa ili, ilyun, ilwun, ala, whatever. But some scholars actually said that no, this ala, that there is no singular form to it, and that's why you would say ala as the singular of it. You just basically say ni'amullah or ni'ma, and that it doesn't have a singular tense. It's quite interesting that he basically said, well, actually, I'm able to get a singular, the singular format of it. But like I said whatever, because scholars debated whether that is actually true or not. Well, does it change the meaning? No, it doesn't. It doesn't change the meaning. Whether you had said that there is a singular form for the word ala, which is a plural, or not. In Lugha Arabiya, there are certain words that do not have a singular root to it, and that the plural is all we have for it. Okay, no need to go into all of that. So let's see right there. And لعلكم تفلحون, we did talk about لعلكم تفلحون, but I want you to always emphasize فاذكروا آلاء الله لعلكم تفلحون. In other words, even if you might not be successful, just mention the things to yourself. It doesn't have to be to people. Hey, I'm taller than you. Don't you see that I'm taller than you? Or, hey, you know what? Look, my grades are better. That means I basically have a higher IQ, or etc. No, you don't want to brag about it, because that's not something that you had given to yourself. That's number one. You don't want to brag about it because that might actually bring all that hasad to yourself. You don't want people to envy you. So what should you do? Just recognize it, not for the sake of feeling entitled, but recognize it in order to see such a bounty, in order to use it for the sake of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, in order for you to recognize it, and see it And certainly from that, you basically would see قالوا أجئتنا لنعبد الله وحده ونذر ما كان يعبد آباؤنا. And they said, have you come to us to worship Allah Almighty and abandon what our ancestors were worshiping? So come with what you promised us if you truly are from the truthful ones. And then he said, قَالَ قَدْ وَقَعَ عَلَيْكُم مِّن رَبِّكُمْ رِجْسٌ وَغَضَبٌ. And he responded, you had been entitled to getting rijs and ghadab. Entitled to getting rijs. What is a rijs? When we speak about rijs, we're going to get to the word rijs, okay? And we're going to find the word rijs. And I've got right there a beautiful article that was actually written just about the word rijs. We're going to get there. Okay. أتجادلونني في أسماء سميتموها أنتم وآباؤكم. Are you debating me about names that you had made up, well, you and your fathers had made up, and your Lord Almighty had not revealed anything to support such a claim? So wait, and you'll see me waiting as well. And we had saved him and those that were with him by the mercy of the Lord, or mercy from us. And we had exacerbated the offspring of those that had denied our verses, and they were not amongst the believers, or they were not believers. Let's see right there. So did they actually request that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala would destruct them? So what was that? Did they really request that? Well, they did and they didn't. They didn't necessarily request, hey, bring that to us. And they did. I know it's sounding like an oxymoron here, but they did not believe it. So they were basically trying to appear confident. And they were saying, well, if that is true, just bring it to us. So here, trying to appear confident that that's not something that will happen, and at the same time, that also reflects that they were really disbelieving Prophet Hud alayhi salam, and to the point that they were challenging him that is in any shape or form something that will ever happen, or whether it is true in any shape or form. So they were challenging him and saying, well, if that is true, go ahead and bring it to us. We're not afraid. That's basically what they were seeking. So they didn't believe him, and they were challenging him to bring the destruction. So that's when he said, قَدْ وَقَعَ عَلَيْكُمْ. Does that mean that it really happened? And that's one thing that Tahir ibn Ashur, he went in some details along with al-Biqa'i. Al-Biqa'i also, he said, when this ayah said, قَالَ قَدْ وَقَعَ عَلَيْكُمْ مِنْ رَبِّكُمْ رِجْسٌ وَغَضَبٌ, is that something that already had happened, that he basically had said, well, now that rijs, or this anger from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and this punishment is now falling upon you? Does that mean that it already happened? Or does that mean that he's saying, well, now you had come to the degree where this is the trajectory of what you had basically denied, is that you will be now facing destruction. You will now be facing punishment. Now you will be facing the trajectory of your rejection to faith, and that the rejection is basically to be a curse. Let's say. So here, Al-Qurtubi said, وَقَعَ الْقَوْلُ وَالْحُكْمُ. So in other words, what is he saying? that, well, it would be said, وَقَعَ عَلَيْكُم, meaning that now it was ordained by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and that the word of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is basically, if there is disbelief and they're insisting once they get the message to disbelieve, then in that situation, they would be entitled to one thing, which is their punishment. So therefore, the ordain of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in words that they are going to be destructed, and then therefore the curse in application is going to happen. Let's see. لما وقع عليهم الرجس in another ayah, meaning that it basically did apply to them. And in another ayah in Surah Al-Naml, وإذا وقع القول عليهم أخرجنا لهم دابة من الأرض. So what does it mean وقع عليهم? It literally means fall upon them. But here, this isn't talking about falling upon them, meaning something physical, but it can also mean something that is more of an idiom to mean that it was ordained. Not that it necessarily did literally fall, but it was an ordain that they will basically find coming at them. So that's what we would mean وقع القول عليهم or وقع عليهم, that this isn't talking about something falling upon them, but this is an idiom to mean that it became a final judgment or an ordain by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala that would be applied upon them. That would be applied upon them. Okay, let's see right there. الرجس. So if you were to say وقع عليكم رجس وغضب من ربكم, even though it says قال لقد وقع من ربكم رجس وغضب, but it would also mean that what was ordained, what was the judgment, what was the trial, and the final judgment, what conclusion did it come up with? That there is an ordain, that there was rijs and ghadab. What is a rijs? Let's see. Here, a rijs, some scholars actually said it means the punishment, al-adhab. Other scholars actually said it is a rain ala al-qalb. What is a rain? What is a rijs and what is a rain? Two different words here. Two different things. So is this a rijs? Here, some scholars, when they said the rain, they were talking about rust over the heart. So what is the inference? If you were to say that this is talking about the rust over the heart, meaning that insisting to engage in sin affects the person's ability to process whether information or process what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala had basically sent. And this is very important to keep in mind. So if we're talking about it is harder for people that engage in sin to accept Islam and guidance than people that do not engage in sin. So for example, even though it's a lot easier to do da'wah in prison than do da'wah on university campuses, way easier to do da'wah in prison than on university campuses. Huge difference. You do da'wah in prison, and these people are ready to embrace da'wah from the first and second and third sessions. Wallahi al-azim. I've had so many people do shahada in prison just from the first, second, and third session. But when you do da'wah on university campuses, the commitment, and it takes a lot longer to see that. I mean, I've had lectures where I've given lectures and on university campuses, and then they would call me just from one session and call me and do their shahada. I gave St. Paul College, a lecture in St. Paul College, and I get a phone call a week later at 6 a.m. It was an African American woman that attended that lecture. And I usually display my phone number and say, here's my phone number. You want to do Shahada? You want to ask any questions? Here's my phone number. And they would call. And a week later, she calls me and I can hear her running. I can hear her running. And then she said, I'd like to do my Shahada right now. It was at 6 a.m. I don't know. She called me at 6 a.m. Um, and I said, are you sure you want to do that? She said, yes, I am really sure that I had taken your advice and I read the Quran within this week and I'm ready to do my Shahada. I said, would you want to perhaps maybe meet and maybe sit together and maybe if there are any questions, give yourself some time to think about it, etc. She said, no, I don't want to live another hour and without my Islam and without me being Muslim. I want to do my Shahada right now. That's why I'm calling you at 6 a.m. And we did the Shahada while she was just waiting, running to go to her bus stop and did the Shahada at 6 a.m. just a week after hearing that lecture, just a week. I pass out Qur'ans. They're the blue copies of Qur'ans from the small blue, sometimes Sahih International and sometimes the other pocket size Qur'ans, and we would pass them out. And just, you can have those situations on university campuses. But I'll tell you, still, it is a lot easier to make da'wah in prisons than actual university campuses. University campuses, I rarely had people want to do the Shahada on university campuses. But I had so many that wanted to do their Shahada and did their Shahada in prison. So many. Now, is it because they're feeling hopeless, desperate? Maybe, who knows? And by the way, people usually think that people in prisons are uneducated. Not necessarily always. Certainly, you would have the level of education in university campuses, definitely a lot higher than prisons. In prisons, you can have people that are very educated with master's degrees and PhDs. You can have that. Not too many often. I mean, not too often, but not too many times, but you will have that. You will find that. And even Muslim women, by the way, that, had master's degrees and, graduate degrees and Muslim and non-Muslim too. So not everyone is necessarily uneducated in prison, but, just something to say. It would be really interesting. Why do I see more people accepting Islam in prison than actually on university campuses? That's another story. Okay.
Dr. Aisha, if I may ask, did you have an answer to that?
Did I have an answer to that?
Yes.
Well, in prison, people are really, really desperate. In prison, people are having enough time to think. The distractions are a lot less. There's no comparison. So this person in prison, they're definitely not getting enough sleep. You would think that they're sleeping all the time. That's not actually true. But still, they have a lot more time to process the thought that you are displaying, that you're talking to them about. You would give them books. They're reading it. There's nothing to do. They're reading these books. They're taking the time to read. There's a lot less distraction Then on university campuses, you've got these classes that you need to run to, homework, assignments, do hand in, all of that. So you would see that there's so much to process, and a lot of friends and a lot of hangouts on university campuses. But in prisons, the distraction is way less. Distraction is way less. Within 1 week, they'll tell you they're done with reading the Quran. They're completely done. Or the pamphlets. They read it probably 5, 6 times and thought over the ideas of whatever pamphlet that you had given them. The ideas that you probably talked to them about. They're thinking about them and thinking about them and all of that. So I would say that's a key component, but there's also a psychological component, like I said, is that they're just feeling that everything is just closed around them and no open doors. And then they just want one door to be open, which is the door to heaven. Everything else is closed. And we're talking about people that, one, sometimes going still through the trial, it's not yet done. And some of them did finish their trials. So I would actually do da'wah to both, those that already finished the trials and they're just completing their sentence. And sometimes I had people that had 23 years of sentence, and others, that was probably the most, 28 was actually the most that I had seen, 28 years, or was it 27? 28 years or 27 years of sentence. She was responsible for killing 7 people. And it wasn't directly, it's not like she choked them and boom, right there, killed them. But no, she was selling in fentanyl. I think that's what it was called, fentanyl or something like that. And that was used in order to make meth. And then 7 people died as a result of that. And I don't know exactly, how they came to the number of 27 or 28 years of sentence. I don't know exactly how, but she was, whether it was a direct, I guess a direct, directly killing or indirectly, I'm not sure how they came up with that number, but in the end is that she was responsible in one way or another for the death of 7 different people. That was probably the most sentence. There were others that were 2 years, 3 years, 4 years, and a lot of Muslim women, by the way. You'll be really surprised. A lot of Muslim women are there. And they're not coming necessarily from one ancestry or one race. No, I've had Arabi, I've had Somali, I've had Pakistani, all races, converts, all races, and yes, Muslim women too. And some were hijabi, some were not hijabi. There's definitely some racism in the way that they may deal with cases, and probably accuse them easily of wanting to do a terrorist attack and not take mental disorder as a reason, even though there were many cases where psychosis or schizophrenia was definitely something that was so apparent and so obvious. And there are many people with mental disorders in prison, and it's really sad that they're actually in there because it's so obvious that these people are mentally incompetent. It's so obvious. It doesn't need an expert to see that these people are going through some form of psychosis or some kind of a schizophrenia. It is so obvious. But one thing that I will always, remember that when I ask, well, if these people are in this psychological state, and we know that they're in the psychological state, why are they here and not in mental hospitals? And they said that the insurance doesn't cover them and that they're perceived to be a threat to the society. So and the hospitals are not taking them in, so they basically end up in prison to keep, quote unquote, the society safe. That's so sad, because if this person is ill and is mentally incompetent, it's exactly like putting a person that was diagnosed with cancer in prison. It's exactly like that, because their illness is probably perceived by the society as scary. So we put them in prison instead of giving them treatment, or at least give them safe spaces to be safe and not harm themselves or harm others. But now they're vulnerable to criminals' harm. This is exactly what's happening in US prisons. It's just so sad, to be honest, that these people are so vulnerable to these criminals' harm and abuse. But of course, insurance doesn't cover their stay in the hospital, so they end up staying in prison. So you will find that as well. But that's another story, I guess it's quite sad, to be honest, to just remember all those cases where that this person is mentally ill, but then they're actually in prison. Instead of getting treatment, they're actually giving maltreatment from the different prisoners. Allah al-Musta'an. Okay, now let's go for right there, al-adhab. I want to go over the word al-rijs. This is very important, because when we're speaking about al-rijs, we're actually talking about a word that appears often in the Quran. And I want you to look at this one. I like this page right there. Of course, I just Googled it right there, but I like this page right there. Let me show it to you. And let me see. I hope it comes out. And where was it? Oh, man. Okay, I just had it right in front of me. Okay. Oh, here it is. Okay. And what I like about this is that it would give you all the different ayat that actually had the word rijs in it, and the tafsir. That's pretty cool. And the different tafsir and what that means from this tafsir and that tafsir. But I'm not going to necessarily do that. I'm just going to go to this article right there and just make it really easy. You could see it's slamweb.net, so really easy. They did this article just on the word rijs right there, and certainly they said, and of course you can actually translate it right there. All you need to do, go to translate and actually translate it, or you can just click this little, I don't know, whatever, Chinese, Japanese, I'm not sure what language that is, but then you can click it and it would actually give you the ability to translate it. So you can translate it, and here we go. Like I said, not always necessarily the 100% accuracy, but it's actually a good note to know how to translate things. So I'm not going to use the translation, because of course I need to get back to the original Arabic word, because I'm going to do the translation for you. Okay, so let's see. Rijs here, they said that it basically has multiple meanings. Some of it is literal meaning, and some of it is basically figurative meaning. And this is very important to keep in mind. So some of it is a literal meaning of what rijs actually means, and some of it is a figurative meaning. What does that mean? That there's an etymology to it. Now, you want to remember that when we're speaking about language, it was supposed to be, in the beginning, it was simplified meaning, a simplified reference to a name of something, and then later on, the societies started using the basics of that word and would add more meanings, and it became more complex to give different, richer meanings, to give us the different meanings, whether we're speaking about the figurative meaning or metaphorical, hyperbole, whatever it is, that basically would make it into a more complex meaning than the simplistic, or at least than the, let's call it the organic meaning of it. Let's see. So what does it mean? And what's the difference between rijs with the letter sin and rijs with the letter Z. So look at the difference right there. Okay, let's see. The scholar Maqayis al-Lugha, we're speaking about Ibn Faris right there, and he said that the letters Ra, Jim, and Sin, so we're speaking about this word right there, that the original meaning actually means when something is mixed into something. So we're speaking about some form of mixture of something, or something is integrated into something. So whether we're speaking about the integration of perhaps maybe the different sounds, maybe of thunder, or probably we're speaking about different sounds integrated with each other, mixture of sounds, mixture of different things. So we're speaking about the sound perhaps of a camel, or maybe the sounds of even how the different clouds might actually integrate. You know, we're speaking about different particles of water, and this particle of water gets combined, and then it becomes this huge cloud right there. Okay, another meaning for rich is something that is impure. Okay, how did it become from something that is a mixture of something to something that is impure? So if we're speaking about something that is combined, we're speaking about something that you're seeing it as a combination of multiple items of different things. It's not a plain substance, and therefore a combination of something. And if it's a combination of something, is it a combination of something that is impure, or is it something that is probably just a combination to mean a mixture of different substances that are, let's say, not understood of what they are? Is that basically to mean at least the organic meaning, the simple meaning of it? Is this the etymology of it? And what does it mean? Let's see right there. It actually appeared 10 in different 10 different occurrences in the Quran, and from that كذلك يجعل الله الرجس على الذين لا يؤمنون. That is how Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala would let that ridge. So we're still speaking about it. Are we talking about some kind of a component? Or are we talking about something more sophisticated than a component of something? What does it mean? And that's what we're going to get to. So let's say we're going to try to combine the different ayat that had the word rijs and try to figure out the different meanings. So now we know the organic meaning of it, which is to combine something or something that is impure. So now we're trying to understand how they fit within the different ayat with this, let's call it basic meaning. Let's see another ayat. إنما الخمر والميسر والأنصاب والأزلام رجس من عمل الشيطان. That alcohol, that gambling, and well, more like lottery. Well, yeah, and al-azlam, they're all different types of gambling. Okay, is all rijs from the actions of shaitan. Okay, and Ibn Abbas narrated, a rijs basically means a sakhat, that it's a curse. Wait, so we're talking about alcohol, we're talking about gambling, we're talking about different actions that they used to do with basically fortune telling. So something like fortune telling, that is all a curse from Allah. Or let's see another interpretation, that is all evil. Sa'id ibn Jubayr said it was a sin. At-Tabari said it is sin and smelling bad. Well, I mean, I understand that you can say alcohol smells bad, but how does gambling smell bad? No, this isn't talking about it literally smelling bad, but we're speaking about the implication of it, that it will basically bringing harm, and that this harm would basically be something that will have an implication within the society, that it will bring about this type of let's say repellence people repelling from one another. So when something smells bad, you tend to either close your nose or close your mouth or probably repel away and choose to be distant. So that's how, if something smells bad, you would choose to be distant. So then, therefore, when we're speaking about probably alcohol or probably gambling, that it will cut the ties of people. And therefore, it's a sin to mean it is harm. It's a sin to mean that it will be something that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will hold you accountable for. It is a sin because of the evil implications within the society. It is a sin and evil thing that it will result in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala basically cursing that society or cursing that person. Therefore, it is something that is disgusting, something that is to be that is to be considered as hated. So in other words, what are we talking about? I thought you said rijs was a composition of something. So we're speaking about a composition of curse, a composition of evil, a composition of sin in relationship in your relationship with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, a composition of sin and smell. In other words, breaking the ties. In other words, the dynamic of it is basically cutting the ties of people. Therefore, it is something that is detested. Let's say another meaning for rijs, and then let's say right there, and he said it means shaitan. How did you get there? كذلك يجعل الله الرجس على الذين لا يؤمنون. That this is how Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will let a rijs be upon those that don't believe. Well, how does that rijs fit within here? Are we talking about a composition? Or what are we talking about? So now we're speaking about a literal meaning, and they said that means shaitan. So that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will actually let the shaitan be upon the disbelievers. How does he become upon them? No, he doesn't become upon them. In other words, he becomes their authority. The disbelievers, if they had chosen to distance themselves from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, then in that situation, shaitan will be the one to be in control over them, will be the one to be in control over them, will be the one to be in one, as their authority, two, as basically the main influence upon them. Let's see the other interpretation. They said, well, rijs actually means something that there is no good in it. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala lets a rijs, which is a component that is not good, be upon those that are disbelievers. So what does it mean, mala khayra fi? So in other words, we're speaking about the disbelievers, they'll become harmful. If we say la khayra fi, that means they become harmful onto the society. I mean, they're contributing good. Computers and all these different things, how would you say that they're contributing harm? We're not talking about that there's zero good. We're speaking about that there's harm within the society in how they will project different types of harm, different types of one in relationship with people, in relationship with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and the list goes on and on, in injustice, etc. That's that projection of evil onto the society. So what about, I mean, when you look at all the different things, maybe science, etc. I mean, just remember that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala even talked about alcohol and said that the evil in it is more than the good. The evil in it is more than the good. What is the inference? That yes, alcohol can have some benefit. Did you just say that right? Alcohol can have some benefit. Yes, alcohol can have some benefit, but the default ruling in Islam is that if something's harm is more than the benefit, then it would be haram. Therefore, anything that has more harm than its benefit is basically going to be considered as something to avoid. And that's why Shatibi, with basically using that inference, he said, well, if something always leads to harm, then that's haram. If something sometimes leads to harm, then we'll put some regulations to make sure that we take out all the different things that may lead to harm, and we'll try to squeeze the good in it and probably do how can we make it beneficial? Marijuana, for example. Okay, there's some good in it, but there's also harm in it. Can we use regulations to say, okay, hey, experts in probably maybe in chemistry, or experts in medicine, and we need a couple experts to probably see a way and see the illnesses that are that can be cured by using marijuana. Is it beneficial for certain people? So can we then say we need a doctor's prescription to use these kind of cannabis, to use these kind of plants, to make sure that we're basically using it in a way that is bringing the benefit and taking out the harm? Can we use it that way? Okay, so do we need a doctor's prescription? Now we won't necessarily say, okay, if everything is about marijuana is wrong, we'll say, wait a minute, we need then a doctor's prescription, and now we're paving the way to making this cannabis be used for something that is beneficial. Let's say, if anything barely leads to harm, but it can lead to harm sometimes, then in that situation, we will say this is halal. It can lead to harm that, for example, women driving. Yeah, I mean, she can have a flat tire and probably, end up needing some help, and who knows what might happen. But this is a rare scenario. You're not going to make that as the default and say, okay, yeah, she can have a flat tire, and a guy coming up and probably helping her with her flat tire and can probably, who knows, maybe flirt with her and whatever. No, we're not going to use that as a scenario, as the default scenario. So therefore, we'll say, okay, make sure that you don't go too far. And that way, if anything happens, your mahram could come to the rescue, etc., then that's a different story. But of course, that would take us somewhere else. And when we look at right there to understand الرجس, we're looking at al-khair, whether there's good in it or there's no good in it. How do we understand it? كذلك يجعل الله الرجس على الذين لا يؤمنون, that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala would basically let, whether it's shaitan or whether that the disbelievers will basically cause different harm or cause different things within the society, or whether يجعل الله الرجس على الذين لا يؤمنون to mean the torments of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. The torments of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala basically come upon the disbelievers. What do you mean torments? Like punishment? Yeah, like a punishment. Well, كذلك يجعل الله الرجس على الذين لا يؤمنون. That is how Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's punishments would be upon the disbelievers. So what does it mean that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's punishment? So for Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, وَمَن يَعْمَلْ سُوءًا يُجْزَ بِهِ. If you do something wrong, that wrong will be coming back at you. You swear at somebody, don't expect them to give you a hug. They're going to swear back at you. You steal, don't expect to live secure. You're going to expect to be insecure, probably afraid that you will be caught one day, and you will be caught one day if you basically you make it as a habit. You lie. You're afraid that people might discover your lie. You harm people. You're afraid that people might retaliate. So then in that situation, that same thing. You see that you committing evil, then Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will basically bring that retaliation and that punishment upon you because you had committed evil. Don't expect to get rahmah in return. Doesn't happen. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala told you that the default ruling, وَمَن يَعْمَلْ سُوءًا يُجْزَ بِهِ. You do harm, it comes back to you in harm as well. Let's see. فإنه الرجس also has another meaning. فإنه رجس أو فسقا أهل لغير الله به. What is فإنه رجس أو فسقا أهل لغير الله به? We're talking about the animals that were slaughtered, that they are rijs, or it's a fisq, that it was intended for other than Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So what is rijs then here? That it was something that is haram, something that is forbidden. Or is it to mean something that is khabith, something that is impure and evil? Let's see the other meaning of rijs. قال قد وقع عليكم من ربكم رجس. When he had said, well, that's the same ayah that we were doing, that upon your Lord Almighty, or from your Lord Almighty, it had become ordained that you will get a rijs, to mean here curse. Let's say here, العذاب الرجس. Let's see another one. الرجس فأعرضوا عنهم إنهم رجس. فأعرضوا عنهم إنهم رجس. And stay away from them, for they are rijs. They are rijs. What is a rijs here? A rijs here is to mean to stay away and repel away from the disbelievers because they are rijs, because they're impure? Or is it because what they do is wrong behavior? Or is it that they are impure, or they are evil in their intention and evil in their creed? Let's see Ibn Ashur. He basically said irrijs here is to mean something that is impure. Let's see here. And he said, and what is intended with this is to give this type of a simile that they are impure in their intention or in their motives, and they're impure in themselves. And therefore, this is to be a metaphorical type of impurity and not a physical type of impurity. Let's see another rijs right there. زادتهم رجسا إلى رجسهم. That it increased their impurity upon, basically it added onto the impurity that they already had, further impurity. So this is talking about evil. This is talking about deviation. And just like Ibn Zayd, he basically said that means that their evil basically led them to becoming even more evil. And therefore, just like when we're speaking about a sin leading to another sin, and their doubt leading to more doubt, and their kufr leading to more kufr, their disbelief leading to more disbelief. And here rijs said, وَيَجْعَلُ الرِّجْسَ عَلَى الَّذِينَ لَا يَعْقِلُونَ. And he would make a rijs be upon those that do not think. What is that? Meaning torments. And most of the mufassirin, when they translated or they interpreted, not translated, but interpreted فَجَتَنِبُ الرِّجْسَ مِنَ الْأَوْثَانِ, they said worshipping idols. And that they are supposed to stay away from worshipping shaitan. And that it was a rijs to mean, rijs ma'nawi, to mean more of a metaphorical type of rijs. Let's see this one. إِنَّمَا يُرِيدُ اللَّهُ لِيُذْهِبَ عَنْكُمْ رِجْسَ أَهْلَ الْبَيْتِ. That Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala wanted to remove a rijs. What is a rijs? The action of shaitan, or what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala does not approve of, and that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala wanted to remove all of that upon the household of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Another interpretation, that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala wanted to remove doubt and shaitan, or even shirk and associating partners with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, or sin. In other words, what does that mean? That Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, He's the one that blessed the people of the household of the Prophet ﷺ from the impact of shaitan, from the impact of doubt, from the impact of wrong and illicit behavior, or from the impact of shirk, or the impact of sin. So at the end, we're speaking about a number of different meanings for rijs. That's sin, shirk, evil, torment, doubt, shaitan, impurity, curse, and some of it is basically to give me a literal meaning, and some of it is figurative meaning. Let's see here, rijs and rijs. Some scholars actually said they both mean the same thing. And other scholars actually said a rijs only means punishment, and the riks only means something that is impure. And you could see some of them actually said that they're both the same, and meaning the same thing. Okay, so this is just a summary of this word. But what about a rain? What time is it? 11:51. Okay. Let's stop right here. I would hate to stop at this word. I would hate to stop at this word. What is the other word? Let's just finish this one, because then we can tomorrow start وَإِلَى ثَمُودَ أَخَاهُمْ صَالِحًا. Let's go for a rain really quick. And with a rain, because we needed to, let's see, here we go. This is a rain right there. What is a rain when he says a rain is basically something on the heart? What does that mean? Remember when the ayah in Surah Al-Mutaffifin, كَلَّا بَلْ رَانَ عَلَى قُلُوبِهِمْ مَا كَانُوا يَكْسِبُونَ? That's a rain, rana. That as a result of what they had committed, their hearts basically got rusted. How do you rust something? And what is rust? So rain is basically the habit. So what does that mean? It's basically just like the rust or water residue that would go probably on mirrors or probably on swords. That's that rust, that residue that would basically start filling upon the heart. It becomes that sin that darkens the heart. That's basically it in a nutshell when you look at the ayah, كَلَّا بَلْ رَانَ عَلَى قُلُوبِهِمْ مَا كَانُوا يَكْسِبُونَ. Let's see right here, the Prophet ﷺ said, it is the servant يُذْنِبُ الذَّنْبَ فَتُنْكَتُ فِي قَلْبِهِ نُكْتَةٌ سَوْدَاء فإن تاب منها صقل قلبه وإن عاد نكتت أخرى حتى يسود القلب فذلك الرين. So what does that mean? That the Prophet ﷺ had explained what ran is upon the hearts is, and he said it is the sin that a person will commit, and then it basically makes a dark black spot in their heart. If they were to repent, then their heart would basically shape with that repentance. In other words, it would get stronger. And if they were to continue with committing that sin, it would darken their heart, and that's basically that rust upon the heart. And that's what it looks like. نسأل الله العفو والعافية. Okay, so when it says that الرجس الرين على القلب بزيادة الكفر, so they basically committed kufr, and that's what later became the residue upon their heart. And it had multiple names. That أتجادلونني في أسماء سميتموها. He was telling them, are you here debating me with names that you basically had made up? And what are those names? They're basically the asnam. They're basically the different idols. It had different names. And certainly they did not have any evidence to prove it. They were basically fabricating a whole series of different names and thinking that by making those names and multiple names, that gives it credibility, and certainly not. Okay, so this brings to the end of the portion about Prophet Hud alayhi salam, and tomorrow is Wednesday. Inshallah, we'll be doing وَإِلَى ثَمُودَ أَخَاهُمْ صَالِحًا. If there are any questions, I'd be happy to answer them, inshallah. Any questions? You can unmute yourselves if you'd like.